Support for this episode comes from the University of San Francisco's SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, better known as JSSJ. The JSSJ graduate level certificate program in JEDI empowers professionals with invaluable skills, tools, and resources to connect generations and ensure inclusive growth. Courses this spring include Meet the Moment, Fighting Anti-Semitism and Building a Just World, and Dismantling Racism from the Inside Out. The JEDI plus JSSJ program is built around your busy schedule, driven by your individual professional development, and steeped in a rich culture rooted in justice. Learn more and apply now. Go to usfca.edu/JEDI.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 459, The Art of Revolutionary Ritual. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And we're in Boston again. Something is happening in Beantown. First, we talked with Charlie Schwartz about Lair House. Then we talked with Gessel Davis about unorthodox celebrations. And today, our guest is Rebecca Hornstein, an activist and artist based in Boston who creates ketubas, Jewish wedding documents, for couples getting married via a project called Rituals for Revolutionaries, which she co-leads and whose founding question is, how can your wedding ritual prefigure the life you want to live together, the beloved community you want to build, and the liberated world we are fighting for? But before we dive in, another big announcement, Apocryphest, our annual Hanukkah initiative celebrating the books that didn't make it into the Bible, but which can and should inspire us Jewishly, is back. Apocryphest is a collaboration with the Torah Studio and its founder, Liana Wertman, and it's been a crowd favorite, so it's time for round 3. You can learn more and sign up to be part of this celebration of the best candidates not always winning by heading to judaismunbound.com/apocrypha. That's APOCRYPHA. By signing up, you'll get access to special Hanukkah emails that shine a light on amazing Jewish stories that you may never have heard before. We'll ask big questions about how we might reconceptualize historically marginalized Jewish texts, and we'll connect those questions to how we might better welcome historically marginalized groups of Jewish people today. Again, sign up at judaismunbound.com/apocrypha and mark your calendar for our Apocryphest Havdalah event, which will take place on Saturday evening, December 27th.
Correction! December 28th is the Saturday, not 27th. Mark your calendar for the 28th of December.
And now for today's episode featuring Rebecca Hornstein. Rebecca Hornstein is the Jewish half of a collaboration of two organizers/clergy people called Rituals for Revolutionaries, which helps guide folks through their premarital process, helps them shape a wedding ritual that reflects their values of collective liberation, and helps set them up to intentionally build a loving, liberatory partnership grounded in solidarity and community. In addition to creating marriage ceremonies and other rituals for occasions such as moving to a new place, coming out, transitioning genders, grieving loss, and bringing new life into the world, Rebecca Hornstein helps couples design a ketubah, a wedding document that is a beautiful, unique, and meaningful partnership contract that captures what is important to the folks getting married. When she's not conducting rituals or creating ketubahs, Rebecca Hornstein serves as the executive director of Boston Workers' Circle, which describes itself as a community and spiritual home for secular Jewish life, a voice for progressive Jewish values and social change, and an arts and education center celebrating Yiddish, Jewish, and progressive culture. Rebecca Hornstein is an experienced grassroots organizer and political educator whose previous roles include working as the organizer for the North Shore Labor Council, AFL-CIO, and the rabbinic peer educator for Teruah, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights. She is an alum of the Join for Justice Organizing Fellowship and the Wexner Graduate Fellowship and has rabbinic ordination from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. Rebecca Hornstein, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Great. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm really excited about this conversation. We've been talking here and there over the last few weeks and months about weddings. And one of the things that you specifically do is work on an element of Jewish weddings, the ketubah. But I actually calligraphed my own ketubah,
Nice.
which I have no skill in calligraphy. I think the main reason was that our rabbi had a particular text that he thought we should use. And as far as I knew at the time, this is 24 years ago, it didn't exist in a calligraphed way, or at least we didn't know where to find it. And so I did it. And actually, having had no experience doing calligraphy, I could not figure out how to get the letters to not smear since I'm right-handed. So I ended up left justifying the Hebrew and writing it backwards in an attempt to get it to not smear. But of course, that left a jagged
You wrote
side
it in
on
the
the
right order. You just wrote it like the order. You rewrote the letters starting on the left and going to the right, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I started from the last letter and
just so
wrote
our listeners
to the
aren't
first
like,
letter.
wait, Dan did a backwards ketubah? Yeah. Okay.
And anyway, so just a fun little story. But I'm curious if we start talking about ketubahs. As you see it, what is the function of the ketubah in a Jewish wedding? Because before our conversation, I looked up traditional text of the ketubah on Chabad.org. And if you do that, it's pretty much a financial transaction that's kind of offensive in all kinds of ways. And I'm wondering, like, why we didn't just flush this ritual down the toilet, but we've actually been doing new things with it. So, like, what is the function of this in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that story. I'll say it's also considered to be a mitzvah in a lot of communities and like an honor for one of the people getting married to actually have some part in doing the physical writing of their own ketubah. So a lot of communities will actually leave a letter blank to fill it in themselves. So there is something about actually physically participating in the writing of the ketubah that has been recognized, in a lot of Jewish traditions as being really deeply meaningful. So you got to do that accidentally.
Wow,
yeah.
I did not know that. But 24 years later, I'm very pleased to hear that. And maybe that was why our wedding has lasted so long.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's something to it. The traditional ketubah is kind of very different than the ketubahs I usually help couples to write. It doesn't mention love or commitment or kind of like a vision for the partnership people are wanting to create. That's kind of the typical type of ketubah I support couples in creating for themselves. But the traditional ketubah is really about the groom acquiring the bride. So it kind of has this very patriarchal part of this like very deeply patriarchal system. It presumes a groom and a bride. It presumes two Jews getting married, and it presumes a heterosexual marriage in which the groom is acquiring the bride, and it kind of lays out the rights and responsibilities basically that the groom has towards the bride. So it lays out that she's guaranteed something in the case of divorce, can't just kind of dissolve without her kind of getting something to sustain herself after. And says that, the woman gets to enter the marriage for her own free will and kind of what her status is if she was previously married or not as well. So those are the things that are kind of outlined within it. And so, while it is marriage as a transaction, at the time, it also, was progressive because a lot of cultures didn't have guarantees for the woman. It was a risk for a woman to kind of get involved in a marriage without those sets of protections. So really, part of the purpose was really setting those protections for her, but also, again, like assumes this particular kind of marriage that's really about like a financial transaction and the woman as kind of a piece of property being acquired through the marriage.
So in our time, we have prenuptial agreements, and it's meant to protect people from exactly those. It's less patriarchal in many cases, most cases, or I don't know, most whatever. But let's say it's often less patriarchal, but it's largely financial. It's largely about certain rights and responsibilities. It's not about love and, how we're going to really be there for each other and that kind of thing. And actually, it seems kind of progressive today, and it would seem kind of cool today for Judaism as a religion to say you must sign a prenuptial agreement, essentially. Mm-hmm. So there's an argument that feels to me kind of cool if that's what it was, but it feels like mostly what people are doing with the ketubah nowadays is not that, but it's that they're kind of reinterpreting the function of the ketubah altogether. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the function is today for you, for most people that you work with, and how you think about the ketubah now.
Yeah, absolutely. So just also to say, like, in kind of an Orthodox context, like the text has not changed.
And it's Aramaic, which
it's in Aramaic.
Even if you have some level of familiarity with Hebrew, it's going to be even harder to connect to it in that language, which I think we'll come back to that later.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I kind of think about how we update our traditions, and I'm a Reconstructionist rabbi, so this is coming from kind of a Reconstructionist orientation, but we look at what are the traditions we've been handed and what do we feel like is like the underlying value that we can kind of take that seed of that value and then innovate it to kind of our needs and what we want for today. So I think with the ketubah, I'm a union organizer in my training and background, so I'm a big fan of contracts. I think like laying things out and laying out expectations both ways when you're kind of entering into something formal is really important, protection for both people, and can kind of like set an expectation really clearly for what you're getting into. And so I think like that is an incredibly, whether it's around kind of the financial piece of marriage or the emotional piece or kind of the vision of what kind of home you're trying to build, really laying it out clearly is really valuable on a lot of levels. If you feel like your vision for your partnership down the line is not kind of panning out, or you're kind of losing connection in some way, something physical that you can kind of come back to that you set out in the beginning can be a really powerful and valuable tool. And I think the act of creating what you want that to be is a really powerful tool as well. When I'm working with a couple today, it is really interesting because it is for kind of how legalistic, patriarchal, et cetera, this tradition is. It is oftentimes like the one thing people know that they want to do. Maybe they also want a chuppah, Jewish wedding canopy. Maybe that's a thing they know, but they kind of know that they want a ketubah. It is something that feels really enduring. And I think oftentimes when I ask people, why, why is this kind of like odd tradition? Why is this a thing you feel so attached to? And the things that come up most often for people are, my parents had a ketubah. I grew up, if there's, a partner who was raised Jewish in the marriage, my parents had a ketubah and I grew up seeing it, like seeing this physical manifestation of their relationship. And something about having something beautiful that reflects you and your partner and your aesthetics and your vision for yourself that you can display is powerful. And having just something physical, like the wedding it's kind of ephemeral. It's a day, it's a ritual. There's not a lot that's physical that you take out from that besides kind of your memory. So having a physical reminder to kind of codify what that day was can be really grounding and feel important to people. In planning a wedding, you can often get so sucked into kind of like the wedding industrial complex and all of these like decisions you have to make around like the details, and people often lose sight of what are they actually doing. And so it can be a way to really reground in why are we getting married? What do we actually want this ritual to be about? And what in our partnership do we really feel is important to express? So I use it as kind of a container, creating a ketubah text and creating the visuals, like really using that as a container for the couple to explore those deeper questions of meaning that can get really lost in the process of planning the big shebang, the big wedding. So there's also another kind of piece to it that I think is really valuable. We still live in a patriarchal society. Like we still live in a context where it's actually pretty hard to create a really egalitarian partnership. I work a lot with queer couples who are kind of, don't have like a heterosexual script, so are really kind of from scratch deciding kind of what do they want their partnership to look like. And I think for those of us in heterosexual partnerships too, we often want to get out of what that script of like a patriarchal heterosexual partnership has to look like. And that necessitates a lot more intention, because like kind of the inertia of where society is in a marriage, to kind of break out from that, I think it takes a lot more thought. And I think a ketubah can be a container for that as well. Like, that's a contract is like let's lay it out. Like, what do we want to see in our partnership? And let's put it on paper. Let's not just go off of vibes. Let's actually lay out like what are the concrete things. And so I think that can be really valuable for those of us wanting to create more egalitarian partnerships as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, partially because I'll be honest, I have pretty actively avoided the word contract when I talk about ketubahs at ketubah signings that I'm officiating or when I'm working with couples, etc., because I think for most folks, it is harder to find sacredness in something called a contract than it is to find sacredness in something that is like a Jewish art piece that hangs in your house that has your values and commitments for the rest of your life together, which is a long hyphenated word that is harder than contract. But like I was thinking about another Aramaic thing in Jewish tradition, which is Kol Nidre, the declaration on Yom Kippur. And if you ask most people, what's Kol Nidre? And there's no context. Most Jews would respond by saying either that it is the name of the evening service of Yom Kippur, like it refers to like a time period, it is the evening of Yom Kippur, or they would say it's this haunting melody. And that's interesting because most people would not say, well, it's a specific declaration that says this set of things about vows. For most people, they're not processing a whole bunch of stuff about vows and oaths when that melody is being chanted. It's like, oh, this is like that annual haunting melody that I hear. And I think similarly, ketubah, if you ask most people, I don't think that it is functionally a contract. You're helping me you're helping me salvage the contract language because I think what you said about protections is very gorgeous. But I do think that this is a moment for us to check in like we have a lot of times about the difference between what sometimes many clergy, not us in this room, I don't think, but like what many clergy would say a Jewish thing is versus what the people experience it as. Because what you described is like, I grew up with this on my wall. I don't think people are like, wow, I grew up with this interesting contract on my wall. I think it's that they grew up with a beautiful art piece that is Jewishly anchored and feels tied to tradition. And that's a powerful thing to have. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about that because you started to go there. But like when you're actually talking with couples, what are they excited about with a ketubah? My sense, and with the couples I work with, is that it's not the contract piece. It's almost the group project piece. Like with B mitzvahs, there's the mitzvah project a lot of the time, do a social justice thing. Maybe we should have that for weddings too. That would be kind of cool. But it's cool to actually kick off your marriage with deciding jointly like a piece of art that you both connect to and a text that you connect to, maybe writing it together and then having it translated into Hebrew, which a lot of people do. Like, talk to us about what are the functions that are really not exactly what tradition has identified, but are what a lot of couples want today.
For some reason, it just kind of becomes the thing people think of when they think of what makes a Jewish wedding ritual Jewish. Again, I think the chuppah, the canopy, and the ketubah, it's kind of like the image people have in mind of like what would make a Jewish wedding ritual particularly Jewish. And the glass we got to break, that's another one that kind of people kind of come into with some idea of. And yeah, again, I think just having something physical is really powerful for people. And I don't know if people necessarily would articulate it that way, but having a physical act that you do in the ritual that then kind of extends into kind of post-wedding.
So you're an artist, and that's an important piece of this, right? Like, maybe this will get very specific, and I think it's okay if it does. I am curious about things like color choices and texture choices and orientations of part of this is my own ketubah. Dan reflected on his. Now I'm doing that with mine. I guess that's what we get to do in these wedding conversations. We have a person who we love in our lives. His name's Matt. Hey, Matt, if you're listening. He's both a rabbi and an artist. And that is a wonderful combo to have. It is the combo that you also share. We reached out to him and he was like, great. What he does is he like makes a from scratch art piece for couples. And when we met with him, it was actually way different from what I expected. He started with like, are there colors that speak to the two of you? Are there shapes? When we spoke with him, we ended up talking a lot about meeting in college in Providence, Rhode Island, and that we love Providence and have like grown together through there. And so our ketubah, it's in the shape of the city of Providence. I was just like, this is perfect. I didn't even know what the city of Providence looked like on a map. I had not like really looked. I'd looked at Rhode Island, but it was like, wow, that's a beautiful encapsulation of a place where we met and that ties in the text that we chose. When you're working with couples, how do you glean certain directions they might want to go artistically? To what extent do they voice that? To what extent do you try to figure that out? Is it fully custom? Is it a mix? Like, talk to us about that side.
I also do custom art kind of per each couple, kind of identifying what they want to see in their art piece. And it's often Often people want to commemorate a place or some symbols that are important in their particular relationship. So whether it's a place that's really important to them or meaningful to their relationship, that's like often a prompt I get, or often I do a lot of like botanical motifs. And so often it will be connected to the place where they're getting married and a time of year that they're getting married, or to where they're from. Can be, I've done ones of kind of different trees or flowers that like kind of represent places that are important to each person in the couple kind of coming together. And I often kind of ask people to share what their aesthetic is, like what kind of art do they like to look at. And kind of from there, then I'll kind of take all of that into consideration and draft a couple of options for people to look at and choose from. One example was a multi-faith partnership, and one of the people was from Turkey, and the other person in the partnership was Jewish from the US. And I did 3 languages. So I did Hebrew, Turkish, and English, kind of the same text in all 3 languages. There was like a particular kind of Turkish art that one of the people in the couple was really inspired by. I kind of integrated that style of art into the ketubah so that it really could reflect, and then also use kind of typical ketubah motifs like a pomegranate, which is kind of a symbol of love and marriage in Jewish tradition that often kind of makes its way into ketubot. That's one example. Another example is there was a couple who loved this particular artist, William Morris. It was actually really interesting because as we were kind of creating the text, they described their relationship. They used a metaphor of a trellis, like in a garden that, a vine would grow on, and that they wanted their partnership. They really felt like their partnership was a trellis. So it was kind of like the stable thing that they could kind of grow around and in between, this like very beautiful image that they kind of created themselves around what their partnership would be. And then they mentioned they really love this artist, William Morris. It's like a turn of the century artist who did all these cool wallpaper kind of designs. And when I was looking up examples of that artist, he actually did a piece of a trellis. And so I kind of, and they had no idea. It just kind of was this weird synchronicity between how they described their relationship. And then, it happened to be that like 100 years ago, this artist that they love created a piece that was a visual representation of that. So then the art I did was inspired by that. Often people come in having no idea how they want. Sometimes people have very specific ideas of how they want it to like kind of either goes one of 2 ways. Either people come in with a lot of specificity around what they want the ketubah to look like, or people come in really having no idea, and it can be kind of a generative, iterative process with each couple to kind of land on the combination of text and visuals that really exemplifies and like personifies in a way their relationship.
So I feel like I'm kind of going on an emotional roller coaster ride in this conversation. I mean, not in the conversation, just as I listen to you talk, because my first emotion is regret, because when you were talking about the ketubah being on your wall and is this kind of memory of this ephemeral day, I realized that my ketubah, partly because it has this jagged right edge because I didn't know how to do calligraphy the right way, it's rolled up in a tube in a closet because it's not really something of the artistic quality to be displayed. And the truth is, it never occurred to me to display it because I saw it as kind of a functional thing. Partly that's from my background, having grown up in a more observant community. And I actually can't think of having grown up and seen a lot of framed ketubah when I was a child, the way I see them all the time now in friends' homes when I go in. And so it was like not on my radar. And I have some regret about that because I feel like, wow, having now understood that from you and hearing about it from you, it seems very, very cool. And I don't have that. Now, on the other hand, I was thinking as you were talking, like, well, what would I want to have on it? What kind of art if I did have one like that? And as I started describing it in my head, I realized, like, I actually have that piece of art because my wife quilted our chuppah. So she actually made a chuppah that is this artistic everything that you've just been talking about, and it's literally been hanging on our wall for the last 24 years. So I do have that thing.
That's beautiful.
Somehow, some of the categories that you're talking about, the coin didn't click for me, until this conversation and realizing what we do have and what we don't have. So just sort of reflecting that it's, for me to listen to this conversation with an open heart, and trying to understand emotionally where you are, and putting that out there for our listeners also, and how you can both hear about something and regret, and then also realize, but you had a version of it. And then what do you do now? That's a whole set of questions. You don't have to comment on any of that. I actually wanted to ask you about the text element of the ketubah. And sort of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, sort of like, okay, so now that we are thinking about new functions of the ketubah, what should the text say, or how do you think about, or how do you guide couples to think about what the text of the ketubah should say in our time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many amazing examples out there of different ketubah texts people have written. So I try to really listen deeply to what each couple kind of wants to get out of the ketubah experience. Where are they kind of on the spectrum of like observance? Are they a multi-faith couple? Are they a queer couple? What does their relationship in particular look like? And we'll kind of guide to particular texts that are out there based on that. And then I always give an option and guide people through kind of a custom text creation process. So I'll usually send a list of questions that are just for kind of reflection around their partnership and what kind of home they want to create, what role do they want their spiritual lives to play into it, what do they want to promise each other, like what are the things that feel really important. So just kind of questions that prompt that conversation. And then I usually instruct them to like have a glass of wine and set aside a night with each other to actually have a conversation and go through those questions with each other, and just use it as an opportunity, again, as a container to really connect. Because again, in the wedding planning process, if you have a good officiant, they'll give you lots of opportunities to reflect and connect, but often people might not have that depending on what their, wedding process is. And so just really guaranteeing that it's a site or another site, or for some people, maybe the site of actually getting down to what are they really doing here. And so they'll have a conversation. I tell them to send me the notes that they have from the conversation. And then from that, I kind of put it into more like ketubah-like structure. So I'll kind of take out the themes that I see coming up over and over again, and I'll synthesize that into a text and then send it back to them. And sometimes there's like a back and forth, but then they have a text that really kind of came from them. So it kind of gets to be a generative process again that I go through with them. And it's really fun. I love getting to do those custom ketubah texts. It's usually really inspiring to me just to kind of hear this kind of inside glimpse into people's partnerships and what they love about their relationship. Each so beautiful in its own way, but so unique also, and different from each text gets to be so different because each partnership is so different. And the things that are most valuable and important are so different that come to the surface.
And I bet it actually, for those that you are officiating and making their ketubahs, it probably makes its way into like what you do and say in the ceremony itself. That seems like a really good exercise, even if somebody weren't doing the ketubah art.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there is part of the, a Jewish wedding ceremony where you read the ketubah out loud. So that's like kind of part of a traditional Jewish wedding custom, is that there's a section where you read the text of the ketubah out loud. So when it is kind of that custom text people generate for themselves, it can be a really powerful moment in the ritual too, and a way for the couple to really share with their community and friends and family who are there to really witness their partnership, what's most important about their partnership to them, and kind of get a glimpse into that intimacy.
That part where you were describing how you hear all their ideas and all their values, and then you kind of turned it into, I took it to mean like a more ketubah sounding kind of text. That reminded me of the new Apple iPhone artificial intelligence function where you can kind of write an angry email and then select it and say, make this friendlier, and then it'll rewrite the email. But in a friendly tone. And so that question about what makes it a ketubah sounding text, it really connects to the question that I have for you about the text. And I don't know if I'm asking you this question as just you, Rebecca Hornstein, or as a Reconstructionist rabbi or whatever, but I'm curious, like, essentially what makes a Jewish wedding Jewish?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially it's about what makes a ketubah Jewish. Like, is it kind of just like what makes it Jewish is to have a ketubah and it can say anything? Or in your mind, are there certain things that it really ought to say or ought to be about in order to be like a Jewish ketubah, almost like kosher as opposed to kosher style?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And yeah, I also hope AI is not coming for my job.
It's coming for all of us.
Yeah, coming for all of us. Even a ketubah is not safe.
Yes, this is the last year that Judaism Unbound will be hosted by human beings.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I recognize I take kind of an extreme position on this, but I think having a ketubah in and of itself is like a symbol that the wedding is Jewish or is coming from like a Jewishly rooted place. And again, most of the couples I work with are multi-faith couples. And so really trying to kind of use that as a basis and integrate other things. And there's also other traditions that have something similar. Muslim tradition has a similar written document that you sign as part of the ritual. I believe Quaker tradition has something similar where actually everyone in attendance signs. So it's not just the couple or the officiant or witnesses like it is in Jewish tradition, but everyone present signs this document. So it's really a symbol of the whole community being there. So it's not, there's something like an underlying need when people are coming into this commitment. And I don't know what it is. It might just be the vulnerability of kind of entering into a marriage that you want something that feels like really concrete and like safe and held and material to really symbolize that. Because it's not just something that like Jewish culture and tradition and religion has identified as a need. It's something that other cultures have as well.
Yeah. And one note, I mean, when you talk about universal human need, this is kind of addressing, often I hear rabbis and clergy say there are no vows in a traditional Jewish wedding ceremony. And I always want to say to them, well, there are. There's the ketubah. Like the ketubah, it's not vows in the way that we inherit in like Western Christian culture with like richer, poorer, sickness, health, whatever. But like that's what this is a declared commitment of future tense values and aspirations. Anyway.
And I think on that, no matter if it's a traditional ketubah or not, it defines like, what do we think marriage is all about here?
Yeah.
For, in the traditional ketubah, it's like, okay, we think marriage is a financial transaction where, a woman is guaranteed food, clothing, and sex, and also should get, because that's kind of the typical obligation a man has towards a wife. That's in the traditional ketubah. We think that's what it's about. That's like what the obligation is. And it's a financial transaction where he's kind of acquiring this property in exchange for that and setting up this household based on that financial transaction. So it really says a lot about what do we think marriage is, and what people decide to put in their ketubah is really, but similarly indicative of what do they think that they're entering into? What do they think they're signing on the dotted line about?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I wanted to go, actually, because I will tell you, there have been two instances where I've been working with folks doing ketubahs. I'm not the one doing the art, but I've been the officiant for the wedding, where I have become, like, in my body, unbelievably infuriated. And they related to the fact that ketubah artists were making choices without telling the couple, where they were writing things in the Hebrew that did not reflect what the couple was doing, or they were, in one case, actually looking to shift both the Hebrew and the English. And what I mean by that is, and it's happened to me twice, and I've done like 16 or 17 weddings, so it can't be that rare, but there is a custom where if people are having weddings on Shabbat, like there's a thing on the ketubah where you say like what day of the week it is. You actually usually kick it off with like on the first day of the week or on the third day of the week or whatever. And when you submit your ketubah, you say like what day of the week your wedding is, and sometimes they ask what time so they can know if it's before or after sunset. I've had two different ketubah artists take weddings that were on Shabbat and change it so that the Hebrew suggested it was not on Shabbat, because from their perspective, I mean, I didn't get their full articulation of why, but my guess at their articulation of why is that there is a prohibition on weddings on Shabbat. And so this is a Jewish legal contract. And so they want that Jewish legal contract to reflect something that abides by their understanding of Jewish law. They also know that most of the time the couples they're working with don't know the Hebrew. They may know that even some rabbis actually are happy to see this change because they think that it will somehow be embarrassing for people to know that a wedding was on Shabbat. But like, I've worked with couples for whom having a wedding on Shabbat was a very conscious choice, a very active choice. I've had others where like it's just because that was the most convenient day for their loved ones or whatever. But I was like viscerally outraged because when you are somebody being asked to take on not just an artistic, but like a sacred artistic ritual act like ketubah, you need to be driven by what that couple is called to, and not by what your values are. And if you can't make a ketubah because it doesn't align with your values in some way, like, okay, then ascertain that at the beginning and don't do it. But don't accept that agreement with a couple and then change what the language is. And the other situation I saw was I noticed with some of my interfaith couples, there were artists that they were working with or companies they were working with where the closing phrase in Hebrew, Hakol Shrir V'Kayam, that all this is valid and binding, was not there. Now there's different creative texts, and in some cases you could argue that like that wasn't a thing that spoke to the couple, and so. But like I talked to the couples in each case, and I said to them, "Hey, just so you know, most traditional ketubas, and even those that are not the old school text, end with like, and all this is valid and binding. Do you want that?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course we want that. We want this to like really be a sacred, true." Kind of document, even if it's not aligned with the traditional. But the ketubah artist was basically saying, well, because it's an interfaith couple, it's not really shrir v'kayam, it's not really a binding thing by Jewish law, so I'm not going to put that text. And I was like in my body infuriated. And I'd love to hear if you share that fury and if you could sort of reflect on like what you're being empowered and asked to do in those roles and why maybe we shouldn't be altering things even if the couple doesn't know what the Hebrew says exactly.
Yeah, I share your deep anger. That's not right. There's got to be some halacha somewhere around not changing a contract in a language that people can't understand. So, someone who is really deep in that, like, find a source for that. I 100% believe it's out there. So I share that, and I think it's about the couple. For me, it's about the couple and about the officiant. Also, there's like a piece like what the officiant's comfort level is around what they're agreeing to. I think if there's a couple with an officiant who's comfortable having the wedding happen on a Shabbat, like that should be reflected in the ketubah.
Right. And to be clear, it said it was on Sunday. Like it literally said it was on a different day of the week, a full-on lie.
Right. That's not right. I think that's not the role of a ketubah artist. And if they have discomfort around a particular thing, then they cannot take on that work. And I think if they have a concern about it, it makes sense to, be in touch with the couple and with the officiant just to make sure that's what everyone's agreed to. But then I think you're really executing it. So I maybe understand like why that wouldn't be in the comfort level of a ketubah artist, but then I think it's their responsibility to not agree to do it. And if they're going to change something, need to be really explicit and upfront with both the couple and the officiant about it.
Well, as an American lawyer who used to teach contract law, I can say that if there's a contract and something is written in a language that the parties can't understand, then it's not binding. Whether it's wrong to put it in or not is a question, but wouldn't be binding. And so, and contract law tends to work the same way across cultures, more or less. And so it would not surprise me. I also don't know for sure what the halacha is, but I would be very surprised if it is okay to do that. In reflecting on the two of you talking about this, it's actually helping me a little bit float an answer to my question of sort of what makes it Jewish, which is that I was just thinking about this idea that people talk about, that a budget tells a story, right? Mm-hmm. But it's really true that a budget tells a story. In other words, a budget's not just something to look, not look at and just its due diligence. Actually, in looking in the budget, you can really understand a lot. In a sense, you're talking about a ketubah telling a story that really the ketubah in the ideal world is telling the couple, but also telling the world. And we've talked a lot about on this show, we've talked about the wedding not only being for the couple, that the wedding is also for their families, for their friends, for the people around. It's saying something about what's happening to all of us in that these people are up there doing something. And different people are going to be doing different things at that time. And it's important for us to know what they're doing. And so in a sense that if the ketubah was a document that essentially says what this is, what this means to the people, that is telling a story. And so if we think about the story that the old style ketubah was telling, for whatever set of reasons, there weren't multiple stories about what's happening at a wedding. There was one cultural narrative and story that was being told, and it was spelled out in this kind of financial exchange and acquisition document. One way to look at it is what a Jewish ketubah is that financial arrangement that we've been doing for thousands of years. Another way to look at it is a ketubah is a statement of what is happening here, and that is what makes it Jewish. So one could argue that if the ketubah just says something else, something not connected, right, then it's maybe not actually what a Jewish wedding requires. But if it's saying what this couple understands themselves to be doing, that's what makes it Jewish. That's feeling powerful for me right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to pick up on one thing you said, Dan, too, of one thing I love about Jewish tradition towards weddings is that it really does situate the couple in this like bigger story, this bigger story of a people, like this bigger story of creation. And like creation is this kind of ongoing thing that by entering a marriage, like you're kind of part of, and that it's important for the community and society that you're in, that this is happening. It has an impact on it. And all of those things impact your relationship too. It's not just happening in this kind of individualistic vacuum. I love that that's so core and like kind of on every level and every ritual that we have in Jewish tradition and every level that it can be. It's really about situating what's happening in this larger story. And like that story kind of expands too in different moments. So of the ritual itself. So, and in our partnerships, kind of like the story we see ourselves in can be like a particular family, a particular joint family, a particular community, or this kind of like universal story. And I think the ketubah kind of helps situate that as well. It's saying, this is like a contract, a transaction that it's not just about the people signing it. It's about, everyone witnessing it and the impact it has on the whole.
We've spoken mostly about a few characters in this story. I like that this is a story, which is the couple, the artist, and to some extent the officiant. What we have not spent any time on really is the witnesses. And I think that's an unbelievably key part of this. And so just to get the like tachlis practical, like ketubahs traditionally have witnesses. You have people, and there's rules about who they are by Jewish law. I mean, by the book thing, it would be Jewish men who you're not blood relatives with, which is interesting, right? Like it points to the contract nature. The idea is that like, oh, well, the people you're related to would somehow be like predisposed to sign it no matter what. So you have to get less biased people. But obviously, whoever's signing ketubah, go ahead.
And not just that, but like part of the reason is they might benefit from a financial transaction because they might have financial ties to you. So they might have their own vested interest. You want someone who's a witness who doesn't have like a material interest in what's happening.
Right. And that's fine. And it also, because like every couple I've worked with is so distant from that being the function of the ketubah, when I've had people who are like, can our siblings sign? I usually, I tell them that by Jewish law that's breaking a rule. And if they care about that, then they may not do it. But most of them are like, okay, fine, glad to know, but I still want my siblings to sign. Because for them, that story they want told is like, this document is being witnessed, supported by the people that are like the folks I really want to see in my life as like folks I lean on, and that may be their siblings. And so the other route I've gone is like, sometimes I'll say to people, there's no limit on how many witnesses you can have. So like, if additional people sign the thing that don't count, it's not like it invalidates the ketubah. It just means that there's more names in there. So like, if your siblings sign, and then you also had, two adult men who are not your relatives sign, then you've sort of done the traditional act, and you also have all these other people on there. And like, that's often been exciting to couples I work with who they rack their brain. They're thinking about the weekend and they're like, there's a few people we really love who aren't giving a toast and who aren't in the bridal party or something. And like, we really want it to be clear that they are people that we see as close. And so the ketubah witness might be a perfect fit for that. And so like that's a little window into some of the routes I've seen with the witness side. I've also seen, and we've talked about on the show, people who have their entire gathered community sign the ketubah. Like everybody who's there signs on literally as a witness. Karaites traditionally have at least a minyan, I believe, and maybe everybody there sign on to the marriage contract. Talk to us about the role of witnesses, because I, for one, think it's really powerful to have a direct role that transforms somebody from like watcher of the ceremony to very active participant in it.
Yeah. I often like frame it in weddings that I officiate during the ketubah ceremony and before the witnesses that the couple has chosen sign it as, you are the people who are closest, you're most responsible for making sure in signing it, you're saying, I'm responsible for making sure that you follow through on whatever it is you think you're doing here, on whatever you're trying to commit to, this vision that you're trying to bring to life. If I see you straying away from it, I have a particular role to bring you back in. So it also, I think, is giving people a role, not just in the ceremony and in the ritual, but in kind of the life of the marriage itself. And people take that really seriously and take that kind of like call and responsibility really seriously. So it works because of all of the people you have around you who are invested and who are invested in kind of your happiness and in the success of the partnership. Yeah, I think it's really a beautiful thing that we have that role.
So I've been actually thinking, I recently had my 7-year anniversary, and like on the witnesses front, I've been thinking like we should actually set up a call with each of them individually and like they check in about the degree to which they do feel like we're in a good spot, like where that support role of a witness could be more than just the day and actually like take on some power afterwards. I will say, I think I'm a little jealous of the notion of a godparent that Judaism, you can argue certain things are sort of like that, but I think that there is something really special about that for some people in their relationships with godparents that are often Christian or from other cultures. And I think that this could be a similar kind of thing where witnesses on the ketubah are not just like, oh, they signed it that day, but where they actually check in every 3 years or every 7 years with the couple. And like, if they do sense any issues, like say so, if they think everything's wonderful, it's just a lovely check-in and you make sure you stay in touch with those people really well. But anyway, I was thinking about that recently.
Yeah, I love that idea. Maybe I'll do that with my marriage too. I like that idea a lot.
So I'm interested in two, I think, interconnected, not that interconnected questions. One is, what percentage of the time are you both the ketubah artist and writer and also the officiant? And how do you think of them as different? The reason I'm asking that is because this is not your full-time job. It's not even a full-time job to be like a congregational rabbi who does weddings as part of the gig. You actually have a full-time job running an organization that has, as far as I know, nothing to do with the weddings. It's the Workers' Circle in Boston, which has to do with workers. I mean, so let's talk about that. But I mean, how do you harmonize your two roles?
Yeah, it's it only actually has happened a couple of times that I'm both officiating and doing the text and art for the ketubah. I feel like kind of a big piece of my role that I see it as an officiant is really being a witness for the couple as to what their partnership is and the strengths of it and the beauty of it and what each of them brings to the partnership and finding ways to articulate that out. I see myself as almost like a representative of the whole community, and kind of am channeling what that community is feeling towards these two people and reflecting that back to them. And then also reflecting kind of what I've learned about their partnership and what's important and at the core of it back to their community so that they can fully kind of witness them together. So I think the ketubah is kind of another site of that witnessing.
And would you say you basically see this as a side gig, or do you see this as connected in certain deep ways to your work at Worker Circle?
Well, I mean, it is a side gig. That's a very joyful one and very fun for me, in a way to kind of keep art, like my own kind of art, as part of my life. I'll say, in a way, it does feel really deeply connected to my work, and that, like, the core of it. I can share a little bit about what Boston Worker Circle is too. We're a 125-year-old Jewish community and social justice organization. So we have our roots in radical secular Yiddishkeit of the turn of the century. So we've been around for a really long time. And the community has both, I think it's this constant, like, creative tension of how do we kind of ground in our roots and make this community relevant for what progressive Jews need today. And that's kind of the work of Judaism in a way. Like, how do we really ground in this thing that's this kind of multi-generational project or story that's so much older than we are, but also figure out how it's relevant, how it intersects with us today, how it intersects with the broader culture and society that we live in today, and how is it meaningful to us. So I feel like that's kind of like the bigger project that, like, both of these things get to be part of in some way or another.
I will say, if we were schmoozing with the folks the turn of the 19th to 20th century who were part of Workers' Circle, then Workmen's Circle, or if we were talking to rabbis from that time period, and we said to them, hey, there's this person in 120 years who is both a rabbi and running Workers' Circle in Boston, I think they would all be confused. I don't think they'd be angry necessarily, but I do think they'd be confused. Part of this is my own grandparents are buried in a Workmen's Circle cemetery. Their socialism and my great-grandparents and my grandparents' socialism was in many ways how they manifested their Judaism through a cultural Jewish experience, much, much more than religious participation. And for them and many, many others, I do think that there was kind of a binary acting there. And we can look at it now in our postmodern vision and say that it's not a real binary, but I think it operated as one for a while. But what I will say is, I think that if I were schmoozing with my devoutly, ardently secularist grandparents and great-grandparents, and I showed them your website, which has Emma Goldman on, is it the homepage or one of the prominent pages, famous Jewish anarchist that was actually from a similar time period to what we're talking about, who had, Yom Kippur picnics with food, was deeply Jewish but not living religious ritual. And if they read your relationship to justice and even the title of your work, Rituals for Revolutionaries, I think my grandparents, who otherwise would be like, I have no interest in ketubas, would all of a sudden have more interest in ketubas. And so I'd love to hear from you what it's like. I don't want to say like blending these two worlds, because that suggests they're two totally separate things. And the whole point is like maybe they're not. But how do you operate on that cusp between some people who perceive their Jewishness through very much what they would call secular or cultural lenses, and on the other hand, folks who perceive a ritual like ketubah as a religious thing, not a cultural Jewish thing?
Yeah, totally. I think it wouldn't just be confusing to your ancestors, Lex. I think my own community and 5 years ago, before I came into this role, would not have believed that there would be a rabbi kind of at the in my particular role. And still so many people do in Boston Worker Circle and who identify deeply as secular do experience it as this binary. It's a really interesting kind of tension to explore. I think there's this idea that secular just means not religious, or kind of is the absence of religion. And I think it's true that secular Judaism kind of developed in opposition to this framework of the time around orthodoxy and rabbinic authority. So it was kind of an oppositional thing that developed. But I think there's also so much substance to it that is kind of beyond just being not religious. Yeah, it's a whole over 100-year-old tradition in and of itself. The way I think of it is in Yiddish, the word for secular, which I think really describes what it is we're doing here at Boston Worker Circle, is Weltlich, which translates to of this world. So it's really about kind of prioritizing the things that make our lives meaningful that are more on this like kind of material level. So, and there's a lot of people in my community who would take issue with the word spiritual and hate the word spiritual and spirituality. But for me, it's meaningful. So I'll use it here, kind of holding that as well. But the way I define spiritual is just like the things that give us meaning that are greater than ourselves. For my community and in the secular Jewish tradition, like those things that give us meaning that are bigger than ourselves, our Weltlich things like, community, like our work for justice and for making a better world, like our care for, humanity and connection to Jewish identity and culture and history and different Jewish identities and cultures and history. So, right, again, it's not just like the absence of religion, it's like a presence of all of those things as meaning makers and core pieces of a Jewish tradition and identity that has its own particular lineage. It's not just like not those guys over there. And, I really resonate with all of that too. Like, I think, so I feel like there's a lot of room for me in this community, even though I am a rabbi. And I think my personal spirituality, I would say, is like Weltlich plus almost like, I really do feel like rooted in the material and of this plane and like the people stuff of Judaism. And there's a lot my like human brain can't comprehend about the world and how it works, and kind of am open to kind of the mystery, but there's like so much I don't understand at the same time. So I would say I'm a little Weltlich plus, but definitely see room for myself here in this secular community.
So just curious whether there are any other rituals for revolutionaries that we ought to know about.
I love ritual and life cycle. I think it's also something that at Boston Workers Circle are exploring is what are other life cycle rituals we would adapt to kind of a secular Weltlich context. I think like a lot of American Jews today aren't year cycle Jews. They're like life cycle Jews, like the times they really engage in Jewish tradition and lean on that as a source for making meaning in their lives are these like life cycle moments in a way that I think is really beautiful. So that's something I'm excited about, kind of like how do we bring, exploring at Boston Workers Circle, like how do we support our members to like mark and ritualize these kind of like life cycle moments of theirs in a way that feels like politically connected and, and secular.
And when you say those, do you mean the traditional Jewish life cycle rituals like bar mitzvah and things like that? Or do you mean there could be new life cycle rituals?
We do have a bar mitzvah ritual that we've done for many, many years, which is a group bar mitzvah. So our whole Zion 7th grade class.
Zion being the Hebrew letter, not
Zion being the Hebrew
Zion, which
letter.
I figured I would clarify for a variety of reasons.
Yes, thank you for that. Our 7th grade class has a group bar mitzvah ritual where each one kind of goes through their own process of describing what being Jewish means to them and kind of articulating that for the community. So we do have that already, but kind of, like weddings, funerals, Shiva, like how would we reimagine like a welcoming ceremony for a baby into the community, and how would we reimagine that in like a left progressive secular context?
I think we need revisioned Jewish life cycle events, Jewish year cycle too, for what it's worth. I think Boston Workers Circle does some of that as well. And it's not because necessarily the classic things we have are always terrible. It's often because we genuinely just benefit when we're looking at through all the different prisms we can. I'm thinking of like, I don't know, what are those, like dodecahedrons, those like cool geometric shapes with like 60 sides on them and they all like intertwine on each other. I think that as long as we don't have a wider span of secular or cultural bar mitzvahs alongside religious leaning bar mitzvahs, alongside those that blend the two, like I don't think we will adequately be serving all of those who are having bar mitzvah. I wanted to close with a question we sometimes lead with, and that's just your name. It's come up a few times, Rituals for Revolutionaries. Why'd you pick it? I have a feeling you giving us a little window into that, even if it's like a cliffhanger, will help us tie this whole episode together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really believe in the generative power of ritual. So I think ritual is not just marking what is happening, although that's an important piece of it, but it's actually creating something new as you do it. So it's actually, I really believe when you go through a wedding ritual, there is a transformation that happens, like or it should, between kind of how you come in and how you leave. Like there's like a change on some level, and people can feel it on many different levels, but there's like a change that happens. I think when we think about like what revolution is, it's like believing in the possibility of change and change being possible always. So, and I think that's kind of an article of faith in a way, to believe that things can change. Like we can change, our partnerships and relationships can always change, the world can change, like that there's like always the possibility of this kind of like things in motion vibe that is like kind of both core to my politics and core to how I feel like a rabbinic role in a ritual like a wedding is.
Thank you so much, Rebecca Hornstein, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thanks. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate it.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. Before we close things out, we want to say Happy Thanksgiving. We hope that you had a really meaningful holiday for those of you who are celebrating American Thanksgiving. And we hope that you will mark this Black Friday, this day after Thanksgiving, maybe by heading to JudaismUnbound.com, because here's the deal. We have some incredible things coming up for you to register for. We have Apocryphest, our annual celebration of books of the Apocrypha, tied to the holiday of Hanukkah, which is, of course, built on a book of the Apocrypha, or multiple, the books of Maccabees. So head to JudaismUnbound.com/Apocrypha, APOCRYPHA, and you can sign up. You can specifically sign up for our Havdalah event that will be the Saturday during Hanukkah, which is December 28th. So head there. Do not pass go. You don't want to miss this. Also, I guess I'm going in reverse order, but the day before that, Friday, December 27th, is our next Shabbat Unbound. So really, we have like a wild weekend of Friday night and Saturday night Jewish programming. So you'll be able to soak into the spirit of Hanukkah and Shabbat and Havdalah and Apocrypha all in late December. So December 27th, 28th, mark your calendars and sign up. Head to JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat for Shabbat Unbound. And as we close, we want to encourage you to be in touch with us. There are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. You can head to our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram handles. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. You can go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com, to find show notes for this episode and all sorts of other goodies. And you can email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. We're also greatly appreciative, as we soak into that Thanksgiving and post-Thanksgiving spirit, if you are able to support us financially with a gift of any size. You can do so on a monthly recurring basis or via a one-time gift at JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.